This is a report that came out, as you said, in February, and the main point of it was to give an update on where we stand right now in America, how many people are behind bars. And that includes people in state prisons, that includes people in federal prisons, and that also includes people in local jails that usually run by the county. And the Pew Center tried to do a complete census, if you will, of all the people at a given period in time. I think it was in January 2007. And they came up with a figure that was in excess of 2.3 million, if I recall correctly. And when you compare that to how many adult Americans there are in the population, which is somewhere around 230 million, I guess, that comes out to a little under 1 in 100 people are behind bars right now. And what's alarming about that is not necessarily the rate at which that's increasing. It's been increasing very quickly for a long time, since the mid-1980s. And criminologists, at least, have known about that. The American public probably hasn't been as aware of that as criminologists have been. But that we've now reached a point where in some subgroups of the population, incarceration is the norm.
The normal life course is a kid comes along, acts out, is crazy adolescent or whatever, goes to school, gets a job, gets married, and is in part of the economy. And all these black youth who drop out because of their circumstances, we can talk more about that, end up being taken out of that life course for a long time. And it also means that when they come home from prison, 15, 20 years later, their life course has been so destroyed they can't get jobs, or they're not easily married. So the whole thing has been disrupted, and this is a particular group in our population that has now been singled out for that.
We're not really making active efforts to rehabilitate people while they're in prison. I mean, we're warehousing them and trying to keep them incapacitated so they can't be on the street committing certain acts of crime. But the rehabilitation ideal kind of died in the 1970s, 1980s, when there were some, through a series of events, but one of the influential things was a report that came out that said nothing works. And more recently, that idea has been discredited, that actually there are examples of both programs in prison and programs that are available for people who are re-entering that do show more success, lower rates of recidivism. But we still haven't, the criminal justice system still hasn't caught up with the science on that. Right. You do find that the more disadvantaged are more likely to go to prison, and that gap between the more and the least and the most disadvantaged has been rising over the last 10 years.
Since I think it's 1990, I've been working with, as you know, Jeff, with people inside the prisons, and we've been doing theater workshops. We've done about 230 plays inside the prisons now, and writing workshops and art and so on. And that means that we've gotten very connected, especially me, having worked now 18 years doing this, to specific people. And I experience a lot of anger, a lot of upset. I've come home a few times crying. Just by the way I see people being treated in prison, when I see them crying about their absence from their kids. Mothers especially are, as you know, tremendously affected by this kind of thing, and feel very helpless because there are laws that have taken their kids away from them now. So there's a lot of helplessness inside, as well as a lot of strength. I would never paint the people we work with as weak people or people who are despairing and so on. They're creative, they're resistant, they find support systems within the prison and so on. So they're complicated people like the rest of us, but they're really hurting.
The estimated cost is somewhere between $25,000 and $30,000 per head per year to keep somebody in prison, which is more than it costs to send a kid to a lot of different colleges in this country. And in some cases that cost is even higher because we have a lot of people with special needs in prison, whether it's problems with drug addiction or mental health, and also an increasing geriatric population that's in prison that encounters more health problems. So that cost can go up to upwards of $70,000 a year per person.
Why do we like having people in prison, and specific people? Why is this? Why are we willing to pay so much for it?
I think that what we've moved towards is a combination of punishment for the sake of deterrence. We really hope that we can be sending a message both to the specific person who's committed the act of wrongdoing, that he or she shouldn't do it again in the future, but also use that person as an example to send a message to the wider society. But the other thing is this idea of retribution and just desserts. And I think that that's one of the deep-seated reasons that people are willing to live with the high rates of incarceration that we have, is they feel like it's justice is being served.
So I guess the question we're kind of circling around here is the invisibility of this, and the failure to recognize the humanity of the people who are inside, and the fact that, and this has been true for every presidential campaign I can remember, is that we're not talking, and our candidates aren't talking about it. I've heard that somebody told me that Obama is opposed to mandatory minimums. That's the only piece of anything that I've heard of any of them talking about that, and yet it's a crisis in this country that we're incarcerating so many people, and they refuse to address that.
There's been some interesting research that's somewhat controversial, but what it's shown is that it's a counterintuitive finding. You would think that the more people who are locked up in a community, the lower the crime rate would be. But what's the hypothesis behind what's called the coerced mobility theory? These two criminologists, Rose and Clear, have come up with this. Is that actually communities that have higher rates of both intake into the criminal justice system and output have a disrupted social fabric. There's social disorganization in those communities. There's people coming in and out. There's more anonymity. There's less social cohesion and less coming together around informal social control to stop crime from occurring. So actually, crime rates are escalating in those types of communities that have the most turnover in and out of the prison system. So it's not the case necessarily that locking more people up is going to lower community crime. It's an open question right now.